You check your bank account and see five figures sitting there. Maybe 10,000, maybe 20, maybe more. The numbers are real, the savings are real. And yet, when you think about spending $40 on dinner with friends or buying that jacket you've been eyeing for months, something tightens in your chest. Your brain whispers that you can't afford it, that you're broke, that you're one bad decision away from financial ruin. Meanwhile, your actual bank statement is telling you a completely different story. So, what's happening here? Why do some people accumulate savings that would make their younger selves weep with joy, only to walk through life feeling perpetually on the edge of poverty? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. This isn't about the money at all. Not really. It's about how your brain has learned to perceive safety. And once you understand this mechanism, you'll realize that the number in your account has almost nothing to do with how financially secure you actually feel. Your brain is running an entirely different calculation, one that has more to do with childhood, uncertainty, and the stories you've internalized about what it means to be okay in this world. Think about it this way. Imagine you grew up in a house where money was tight. Not necessarily poverty level tight, but tight enough that you noticed. Tight enough that you saw your parents stress about bills. Or maybe they didn't talk about it at all, but you felt the tension hovering over every birthday, every school trip, every unexpected car repair. Your brain, doing what brains do, absorbed all of this. It built a template. And that template says, money disappears. Money is temporary. Safety is an illusion. So even now, decades later, when you've built up actual savings through discipline and hard work, your nervous system hasn't updated its software. You're running on the old operating system, the one that was designed to keep you hyper vigilant about resources, because at some point, that vigilance was necessary. Psychologists call this financial scarcity mindset, but I think that term is almost too clinical for what's actually happening. What you're experiencing is more like emotional poverty in the midst of material sufficiency. Your rational mind can look at your savings and think, objectively, I'm fine. But your emotional brain, the limbic system that's been training since childhood, is still scanning for threats. It's still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And here's the really interesting part. Every time you deny yourself something, every time you choose not to spend money you actually have, you're reinforcing that old neural pathway. You're telling your brain, yes, you're right to be afraid. Yes, we need to keep hoarding. Yes, the danger is real. There's a study from Cornell University that looked at how people who experience financial instability in childhood made decisions about money as adults. What they found was fascinating and kind of heartbreaking. Even when these adults had stable incomes and healthy savings, they exhibited the same stress responses when faced with spending decisions as people who were actually struggling financially. Their cortisol levels spiked. Their decision-making became impaired. They experienced genuine psychological distress over purchases that were objectively well within their means. Their bodies hadn't caught up to their bank accounts. But here's where it gets even more complex. Sometimes this isn't just about childhood. Sometimes it's about watching the world, paying attention to economic crashes, pandemics, layoffs, housing crises. If you came of age during the 2008 financial collapse, or if you watched your parents lose their retirement savings, or if you've seen how quickly stability can evaporate, your brain has cataloged all of that as evidence. Evidence that no amount of money is ever truly enough. Evidence that the floor could drop out at any moment. And your savings? They're not a cushion for enjoying life. They're a bunker. They're your survival rations for the apocalypse you're convinced is always just around the corner. There's also this phenomenon psychologists call relative deprivation, which is a fancy way of saying that we don't measure our wealth in absolute terms. We measure it by comparison. You might have 20,000 in savings, but if everyone you follow on social media seems to be buying houses, taking trips to Bali, or upgrading their cars, your brain doesn't process your 20,000 as abundance. It processes it as not enough to keep up. And so you feel poor, not because you lack resources, but because you lack resources relative to what you perceive everyone else has. Your brain is doing mental math that has nothing to do with objective financial health and everything to do with social positioning and perceived status. Now, let's talk about control, because this is really at the heart of it. For a lot of people who save compulsively but feel perpetually broke, money represents one of the few things in life they can actually control. Maybe other areas of your life feel chaotic. Maybe your job is unstable, or your relationships are complicated, or your health is uncertain. But your savings account, that's something you can manage. That's something you can watch grow. That number going up gives you a hit of dopamine, a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that at least in this one domain, you're doing something right. And spending money, even on things you need or would enjoy, feels like surrendering that control. It feels like watching your one stable thing become unstable. Here's the thing though. This relationship with money, this hypervigilance, this constant feeling of scarcity, even in the midst of sufficiency, it's not serving you anymore. Maybe it served you once. Maybe it helped you survive a difficult period. Maybe it protected you from making impulsive decisions that would have genuinely hurt you. But now it's keeping you from living. It's keeping you from experiencing the very security you've worked so hard to build. You've created this fortress of savings, but you're afraid to ever feel safe inside it. And I want you to consider something radical for a moment. What if feeling poor despite having savings isn't a bug in your psychology? It's a feature. What if your brain is actually trying to protect you in the only way it knows? It's not that you're broken or irrational, it's that you're operating from a nervous system that experienced threat, whether real or perceived, and adapted accordingly. The question isn't whether you're being logical. The question is, what would it take for your nervous system to finally feel safe? Because here's what's true. Money is a tool. It's not safety itself. You could have $1 million and still feel terrified if your brain hasn't processed the original fear that made you start hoarding in the first place. Real financial security, the kind that lets you sleep at night, the kind that lets you spend $40 on dinner without spiraling, comes from addressing the underlying anxiety, the core belief that you're always one step away from disaster. So maybe the work isn't about saving more. Maybe you've already won that game. Maybe the work now is about learning to trust yourself, to trust that you'll be okay even if you spend some of what you've saved. Maybe it's about recognizing that your younger self needed to grip tight, but your current self might benefit from loosening that grip just a little, just enough to enjoy the life you've actually built for yourself. I'm not saying spend recklessly. I'm not saying your caution wasn't valuable. But I am saying that at some point, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of building all the security if you never let yourself feel secure? What's the point of saving for a future if the future never actually arrives because you're always preparing for it? You're not poor. Your brain just hasn't caught up to your bank account yet. And that's okay. That's human. That's what happens when we survive hard things. But maybe now it's time to teach your brain a new story, one where you're allowed to have both savings and peace, both discipline and joy, both caution and trust. You've earned that. And honestly, you can afford it.